This week we started talking about compounds and phrases, specifically the compound side of compounds and phrases. So how we make compounds, how we categorize compounds, and the differences across languages, but that was more so in the presentation, so please check Canvas for the slides on that. So as a reminder, compounds are any words that consist of two or more lexemes. So these are like words in English. So we can do noun plus noun to make windmill. So wind is a noun, mill is a noun. Same with basket and ball. We can do N plus V, like fortune, tell. So fortune is a noun, tell is a verb. We could do adjective plus adjective, like something is red hot, bittersweet, icy cold. And we could also do things like adjectives plus nouns. So the example I like to think of is hard hat. In class, there was greenhouse, or maybe even White House you could think of, like as in the building, the White House. And for verb plus noun, someone in class was smart enough to come up with jump rope. So jump is a verb, and rope is a noun, and I cannot think of any others off the top of my head right now. There aren't as many of these as there are N plus V or N plus N. So that's what a compound is, and we can draw word trees for compounds, and they look just like affix trees. So if we have an endocentric compound, so we'll just think of compounds for now, and we'll talk about different types later. For the particular compounds we're looking at now, these have heads, and the head determines the category of the compound. So for instance, in sky blue, we would say that blue is the head because sky blue is an adjective, and so is blue. So that's one thing that the head does. It also gives the core meaning to the compound. So when we think about sky blue is a type of blue. So the core meaning of sky blue comes from blue. So the category and the meaning together inform us that the right side here is the head. Blue is the head. And to indicate that we have a head, we just use a double bar for our line on our tree. So we see the same thing with hip thrust. So thinking about meaning first, a hip thrust is a type of thrust. So according to meaning, thrust should be the head. And if we look at categories, thrust is a verb, and so is hip thrust. So yeah, thrust is the head here. And with basketball, we see it's a type of ball as well that stays as a noun. So here we have to use meaning to determine it because both sides are nouns, so it's not quite sure based on that which side is the head. Now, not all compounds have heads, but these compounds where it's like it's a type of ball, it's a type of thrust, these will have heads, and this is how it's determined. In English, there's a standard rule that we abide by. It's called the right head rule, RHR. So this says that the heads in English compounds are on the right side. In French and Maori, compounds are left-headed. I'd like to correct this and say that this is a noun for hummingbird from what I've heard in class. So the one on the left is French, the other two are Maori. So if we see bird and fly, and we ask ourselves hummingbird, what is hummingbird? Well, categories aren't going to help us with this case, according to actual French. But a hummingbird is a type of bird. So we can assume that this is the head, and French linguists would tell us, yes, this is the head. In Maori, we have a really interesting thing like calendar. So calendar comes from the words month and revolve. So calendar is a noun, month is a noun, and the verb revolve is, giving it meaning. So it's a month that revolves. In other words, a full revolution of the month cycle to get calendar, which I think is really interesting. So meaning comes from month rather than revolution. And then water black gives us ink. And we can see here the categories N. Ink is like a type of water, a type of liquid. So the left sides of the head here. Now, in general, if we want to figure out where the head is, we could think about inflections, because in a compound, inflections will apply to the head. So when we thought about the word lipstick, this is a type of stick. So the head is stick. when we attach inflections like plural or possession, it should attach to the end of stick. So that's what we see. We see that lipsticks is viable, but nobody says lips stick. And that's because lip is not the head, therefore it's not going to take inflection. So same thing with babysitters. It's a type of sitter. Basketballs, it's a type of ball, so the S goes there. And if we have these compound words that have multiple parts, then if we want to get the meaning of American college graduates, so something belonging to an American college graduate, we have to attach the inflection at the end. So this meaning, American's college graduate, is different. So we say that it's syntactically bad under the interpretation. So under this interpretation, this is not an okay thing to say, American's college graduate. Okay, and we see a parallel in syntax, because in syntax, the inflections always fall on the head of the lexical category. So is maybe running, progressive, is appearing on the verb run. For the adjective absolute greenest, we have an adverb or a degree word absolute modifying green, but this est superlative is on the head, which is the adjective. So a little parallel to syntax. Now, using that information about heads and inflections, we can dive deeper into another example from another language in order to determine the head and get evidence. So here we have allomorphs on the definite article. So these are allomorphs. One is neutral, and the other one is non-neutral in terms of gender. And if we take a look at the compound words on the right here, so let's take a look at soup meat and meat soup. So in this case, the order of the compounds are different. Now in Dutch, it is the head of a compound that agrees with other things in the sentence. So there's agreement with gender in Dutch. So if there's neutral gender on the noun, then the determiner is determined by that gender. So this should also be neutral, and same if it's non-neutral. So when we take a look at soup meat, soup is non-neutral, but meat is neutral. And the definite article here is neutral. So if we think about the head being on the right side of this compound, this would make sense because the definite article is agreeing with this neutral gender, which is the head of that compound. And it's the same thing in the B example. Here, the head of the compound, meat soup, is on the right. It is non-neutral. We have a non-neutral definite article. So yeah, we can assume that the right side is the head there. And Dutch follows the right head rule much like English does. So heads are on the right side. So we can see inflection there as well, agreement, and how that works with compound heads. If we have an ambiguous compound in English, we get structural ambiguity. So for example, with American college graduate, there are two ways we can build this. First, we could put college graduate together, and then we could modify it by American. So this says you have a college graduate who is American. Okay, so left side is college graduate who is American. And that's because first we're talking about a specific type of graduate from college, and then we're adding extra information after. But we have a second choice. We could put American college together first. So now we're talking about an American college. And this is describing a graduate. So this is just a graduate from an American college. So let's just put this right here. Graduate from an American college. So these are different, these two interpretations. The one on the left says that the graduate student is American. It's an American college graduate. But they could have graduated anywhere in the world. And on the right side, we're saying that someone graduated from an American college, but we don't know whether the graduate themselves are American or not. So the structure will depend on the interpretation you get. So let's try some compound trees. Pause the video, try them yourself. Okay, and there's actually something a little weird going on here that we'll talk about. But it's a good introduction to the next topic. So let's start with paper cut. Paper is a noun. Cut. Well, here's an interesting thing. Cut is either a verb or a noun depending on the interpretation. So which one is it? Well, let's think about the word paper cut. Paper cut is a noun. And we know that if we think about the meaning of the word, paper cut is a type of cut. So the head, of course, is on our right side here. It's describing the type of cut. Therefore, we have a noun here. It's the noun cut that we're talking about. And this is because the head is determining the category. So we use information about the compound itself to determine the head of our lexeme cut in this case, because we know how heads work. With German Shepherd leash, I'll just write this out twice with abbreviations here. So we're going to have two possible structures. In both cases, these are all nouns, German Shepherd and leash. So let's do the first one that we normally think of. So German Shepherd is a type of shepherd, is a type of dog. And we're getting a leash for that German Shepherd. So the type of leash it's a German Shepherd leash. So this is our first interpretation, a leash that is for a German Shepherd. So German Shepherd is modifying leash. Our second possible structure has shepherd leash coming together first. So this is a leash for a shepherd, or it's just a shepherd's. It's a type of leash that is for a shepherd. That's what this is saying. And now we're going to modify it by German. So we're saying it's a shepherd leash, but particularly it's a German shepherd leash. So it was made in Germany or made by someone who is German. This is not the interpretation we typically think of. So this second one would be like, oh, I have an American shepherd leash. Well, I prefer German shepherd leashes. Well, on the left one, it's like I have a poodle leash versus I have a German shepherd leash. Okay, with the other two, soup meat and meat soup, I did on the previous slide, but in these cases, it's just an N joining together to make an N on top. These are right-headed. Now for newborn. Here's an interesting case. So new is, in English, of course, an adjective. So I'm doing this in English first. Born is typically a verb. It's a newborn, but you can think of it as a noun as well, like an individual. I mean, in the end, this comes up to a noun, but it's really weird to say that you can have a born in English. So this is more like a verb. Now, what's happening here? Why is an adjective and a verb creating a noun? Well, the thing is, this is a different type of compound, because when we think about this, this is not a type of born, and this is not a type of new. Its core meaning is coming from somewhere else in, not in the word. It's not coming from the word. It's coming from outside of the word. So this is a different type of compound, and we say these ones have no head. And that's okay. If we do this in French, we get a very similar analysis where we get an adjective, and instead of a verb or a noun or whatever, we would get a particle. Ne is a particle. And this gives us a noun in the end. So same thing whether you do it in English or French. I'm going to come back to this. Let's continue talking about our endo and exocentric split. So the ones that we were working with before were endocentric compounds. So endo means within or inside, and centric means center. So this means that the meaning of the word comes from within. So dog bed, the meaning of dog bed comes from within. So a dog bed is a type of bed. So it's coming from that head, that right head. Basketball is a type of ball. Windmill is a type of mill. Truck driver is a type of driver. The core meanings of the words are coming from the inside. Exocentric, so exo meaning outside. This means that the core meaning comes from outside of the compound. So if we think of a word like airhead, this is not a type of air and it's not a type of head. It's a personality trait or a description of a person. A pickpocket is not a type of pick and it's not a type of pocket. This is actually the action that describes what the person does, but the meaning comes from outside of the compound. So the example of newborn with the French example was an exocentric compound, while the rest were endocentric. So let's take a look at these ones. First, we have sweep and ground giving us broom. So this is talking about the action. It's a ground sweeper, it's turned into a noun, and then we get a broom. So this is exocentric. So brooms can sweep, brooms work on the ground, but there's nothing there that signals that it is a broom. It's not like a stick. It's not like a sweeper. We have this inflection that turns it into a noun after, or this derivation that turns it into a noun after, depending on what the language does. But that is like after the compounding happens. Stomach pain for stomach ache. This is an endocentric compound. This is a type of pain. An ache is a type of pain. So that would be right-headed. The Kari Moyong tribe. So the meanings here are thin, old, and plural. So this is another example of exo, because this refers to a group of people, but these descriptions, thin and old, are descriptions, of course. The actual meaning, the referent of this, isn't something thin or something old, it is a group of people. And in English, we have highbrow, meaning scholarly, which is not a type of high or a type of brow, so this is also exocentric. Now, in addition to endo and entrocentric, we can also distinguish compounds by these types of meanings. So the first one we have are copulative or coordinative compounds. So this is when we have a compound that has a meaning from both parts. So like in English, sleepwalk means to sleep and walk. So you could think of these as almost having two heads. In Japanese, we have an example, Schema. So the actual Japanese characters for this are younger sister and older sister, and together that makes sisters. So it's like a coordination of younger and older gives you the general term. Vietnamese, we take a property of table and chair, combining them together to create the general term furniture. So another coordinative compound. And then we also have some more literal ones here, like elephant and horse, which is literally elephant horse, and horses and cattle, which is literally horse cattle put together here. So these are all examples of coordinative compounds. We have synthetic compounds. So these are a combination of verb plus direct object. So like in English, we can say I wash dishes, or you can say I dishwash. They have slightly different meanings, but we can see that we have a verb plus a direct object, and then we've just turned it into one word here, which is typically a verb. So those are examples of synthetic compounds, and the process is sometimes called noun incorporation. So noun incorporation meaning we're taking this noun and we're incorporating it into the verb itself. Appositional compounds are noun-noun compounds specifically, where both ends refer to the same thing. So in syntax, we have these. We could say, Billy, who is a farmer, likes chickens. So here we have a relative clause, Billy, who is a farmer. But we can change this sentence by removing or reducing the relative clause. So we get Billy, a farmer, likes chickens. Now, this is called an appositive, this bit right here, an appositive. So what you're doing is you're establishing a person in the real world or a referent, and you're saying, this person is Billy, and by the way, this person is also a farmer. So you're giving two descriptions to the same person. So in English, we have hunter-gatherer, so this refers to a person who is a hunter and a gatherer. German has Dr. Cosmonaut, So someone who's a doctor and a cosmonaut, and Spanish has like philosopher economist, so someone who is a philosopher and an economist. So which type of compounds are these words? So butcher, who is a pork butcher, so butcher, pork butcher. This is, of course, referring to the same person. You're giving them two descriptions. So this is going to be an appositional compound. This night day should say night and day. So we see here it is a coordinative compound, since it refers to night and day, both of those things. Fire alarm is simply a type of alarm. This is just a simple endocentric compound. It is none of the other ones. It's not both a fire and an alarm. It's not noun incorporation here. This is just a regular endocentric compound. I like density here in Tibetan. So thin, thick create density. This is sort of like table and chair creating furniture, like in Vietnamese. So this is an example of another coordinative compound. And finally, a nail clipper comes from nail clip. So it's getting a meaning from both nouns. However, what do we have here? We have this verb stem form. We have a noun here, and this is creating a new noun. So do we want to say that this is like an endocentric compound here? A nail clipper is not a type of nail. It is an action of clipping. So does this have a head? Well, a nail clipper is a type of clipper, which is an action of clipping. But in the end, this is acting as a verb, the right side here. And in the end, we do have a noun here. So we don't want to even say this is endocentric at this point. There could be some other process going on that's changing things, but the reality is that the left side here is not the head, so we don't want to say this is endocentric, so we're going to say none. This does look like noun incorporation, so this does look synthetic. However, our result is neither a verb or some sort of clause. So we don't really want to say it's synthetic here. Okay. Now, I want to go back to this slide, modeling with word schema, because we can do it. I just want to show you how we do it. Whether or not you like this, that's up to you, but this is how we can do it. We can take individual components, our lexemes and our compounds, and give them their own entries. So we have an entry for basket here, and we have an entry for ball. And we can say that the combination of those two with and can alternate with the word form where both of them are together. So we get basket and ball. So a general form is like x and y corresponds with xy. So if we want to generalize this for noun-noun compounds, and specifically endocentric compounds, because we need to create our word schema based off of meanings here, we can say that whatever the first component is means x, whatever the second component is means y, and we know if we have basketball, we know that it is a type of ball that relates to baskets. So for the meaning, we can say type of y that relates to x. So if this was windmill, for example, we would put wind here, mill here. We would end up with windmill, and we know it's a type of mill that relates to wind. So that's how we can do this with the word schema. What we're not getting here, though, is any information about the hierarchical structure. So if you have compounds that have three pieces together, we can't use this to see the different structures and talk about the different meanings. It will just say the different word forms exist. So going back to this next thing, this topic about interfixes. And we'll think about how interfixes work with the word-based model and the Morpheme model. So an interfix is different from an infix. If you have two lexemes and you insert something in the middle, whose job it is to indicate that you have a compound. Then you have an infix. Sorry, then you have an interfix. An infix always has some sort of meaning. It goes inside of a root. But an interfix might not have meaning, usually doesn't, and it goes in between lexemes. So in German, we have the word Volkswagen. You're probably familiar with it. So Volk means people, and Wagen or Wagen means car. Now in the middle, we have an S here. And the reason the S is here is because people is attaching to that S and saying, now we're looking for a compound. We're creating a compound word. So Wagen can join. And this process happens all at the same time. I shouldn't really say it's two processes at once, but the S is signaling that you're in a compound word. So same with love letter here. We have love, a word. We have the S, the interfix to signal we're in a compound. And then we have letter to make love letter. So we see the same thing in Norwegian and Swedish, but instead of an S, we see an S in Swedish and we see an E in Norwegian. So that's an interfix. Now, how do we model this with the morpheme-based model and the word schema? So with a morpheme-based model, what we can do is just draw a tree for it. And the tree is quite straightforward. We do ternary branching here. So we do Volk, S, and Wagen. And the reason for this is because if we did something like this, maybe you want to have the interfix with binary branching. But this would say that this is a constituent. Or you could do it the other way and say that this is a constituent. But the reality is that neither of those are constituents in German, so a ternary branch is going to be the best way to capture constituency. So that's noun, affix, noun, and together that creates a noun. And we might want to give it a head and say it comes from car. So we could do love letter the same way. So let's just keep this up here. We won't worry about lexical entries for the morpheme-based model. Now, how do we do word schema? Well, we can have something X, which is a noun. It has the meaning of X. And we can have something that's the meaning of Y. Just because we're taking two general words here. And we want to get the compound form. So what the compound form looks like is we have X, we have Y, and then we have some sound in the middle. So in this case, it's S. So we could do it's X, S, Y. That's the noun form. And then we get some XY compound meaning. So I'll just sort of leave this blankish. So we can do it with both models. Now, in my opinion, the first one is better because, one, we see structure and hierarchy, which is nice. But the other reason is really about showing what the S is doing. In the word-based model, this S doesn't have any meaning. It's just there in the compound form. We don't know what it's doing morphologically other than existing. And it doesn't really show the interfix nature of it. So that's why I don't particularly like this. And also when we think about meanings, because word schema are so tied to meanings, every single different compound form, so whether it's NN, NV, NADG, whether it's endocentric, exocentric, copulative, we have to create new word schema that describe those compounds in terms of meaning and in form. So personally, I prefer the morpheme-based model because we don't need to do all that, and we can see the existence of the interfix, we can see structure, and so on. So that was it for this week's lecture. We did a presentation on Sacagno and Bassiano, which I recommend you check online. Just seeing a different way that we can classify compounds in Chinese, which doesn't use the same way as English and actually talks about things that are a little bit different than what we did here, which is nice to see. And this researcher here, Dr. Sacagno, actually mostly does stuff on research on society rather than linguistics. So kind of interesting there. Anyways, that was this week. there's any questions, you know how to reach me.